Hello everybody and welcome to the third video in our Sega Retro series, and for now, the last one. So last time we looked at Saturn, before that the Mega Drive, so it seems only natural that we go on to the beloved Dreamcast. Released in 1998 in Japan and 1999 elsewhere, the Dreamcast was the first in what is known as the sixth generation of consoles. It actually beat the PS2, the GameCube and the Xbox to the marketplace. It was also the first system to have a built-in modem, which allowed for online play, and we're talking before Xbox Live had come along and really popularised online play on consoles, and of course Sony's own online service. Sony Online Service launched with a staggered approach around the world, originally 2001 in Japan, 2002 in the US, 2003 in Europe. Xbox Live would launch in 2002. This system would go on to sell a solid 9 million units worldwide before being sadly discontinued in 2001. This is seen as a system that was wildly ahead of its time. It boasted impressive and innovative tech, as well as a really superb lineup of games. So what really went wrong? Why was it discontinued so early, and why did Sega leave the console market to become a third-party publisher? Now, again, with a lot of these things, there's always a lot of speculation, and there are other YouTube videos that probably delve into history a bit more than I have. But looking into it and doing a little bit of research myself, it seems the main reason for its discontinuation and Sega turning to a third-party dev is primarily just down to money. Sega were hemorrhaging cash, and being a part of the console race was a big part of it. You've heard in the past about the losses companies like Sony and Microsoft make on consoles. Sega needed sales, and while the Dreamcast did seem to be a success, especially compared to the Saturn, it just wasn't really pulling in the numbers needed to keep Sega from eventually going bankrupt. When you throw in a format and a GD-ROM that was remarkably easy to pirate, you had a lack of support from certain third-party publishers like Squaresoft and EA, things like the PS2 on the horizon, tons of hype behind the PS2, the eventual coming of the GameCube, and Microsoft were announcing the console. It's kind of easy to see why it was maybe a better option for Sega to cut their losses in order to survive as a company. And we can't really blame Sega for that. It did help the company survive, and if you have a look at where Sega are today, they are in a much better position than they might have been back then. Still, you can't help but speculate, what if Sega had managed to hold on that little bit longer? What if they could have survived based on the Dreamcast alone? Would they have bowed out anywhere? Would we have seen a Dreamcast 2? It's one of those questions that I think, alongside things like what if Sony and Nintendo had actually released the PlayStation, it'll always be debated and we'll never actually know the answer. So let's go back to the series itself. To this system, sorry. I was a bit of a latecomer to this one. Around the time this came out, I simply wasn't interested. I was a huge PlayStation fanboy, and my own experience of the Dreamcast was playing Sonic Adventure briefly at a display in PC World. I absolutely loved the look of the game. It was Sonic, but not really interested enough to get one. Over the years, I would hear little bits and pieces about the system. I remember being told about this amazing game called Shenmue. I remember seeing things pop up about the controller and the VMU and the tech there. And after the Dreamcast's demise, you would of course see some of its titles be ported to other platforms. Crazy Taxi being the biggest one for me on the PS2. I remember getting that. But it wasn't really until 2009-2010 that I would actually play one of these things properly. I was at a convention, and there was a games room, as there normally is, and there was a Dreamcast with this little game called Techromancer. As you may know, an anime fan, giant nerd who loves giant robots, so that game interested me. I gave it a go, really enjoyed it. It was a fighting game, which, surprised me how much I enjoyed it, but the day I got back from that convention, straight onto my computer on eBay, purchased this Dreamcast that you see here, bought myself Techromancer and a handful of other games, and there we were. I was a Dreamcast owner, I had this handful of games, and it was time for me to actually fall in love with this system that many others like. So before we actually look at some of the games, let's have a look at what we actually have here. So you have a look at the Dreamcast itself. It's quite a standard sort of boxy console. Certainly not too remarkable. It's very unassuming. It doesn't have the sort of style that the Mega Drive does. The one thing I do like about this, and that I liked about the N64 and the GameCube, is you've got the 4 ports here for controllers. So say you've got a couple of friends over, you want to play a 4-player game, it's very easy to do that, unlike on the PlayStation where you needed the multi-tap. Aside from that, it's what you expect from a console. It's not too dissimilar from the PlayStation. You've got a power button, got an open button for the lid, and inside there. Now, around the back, what we've got is for your power, a serial cable, the AV out, and for your modem. So, yeah, pretty standard. Now, perhaps more interestingly, is the controller itself. Now, if you did watch my Sega Saturn video, you'll notice I said that the sort of 3D controller for the Saturn is maybe a bit of a precursor to this one. And you can see that. You've got the analog stick up here, a D-pad, start button, and your face buttons there, as well as 2 shoulder buttons, which are a lot nicer than what you had on the Saturn. The dual analog hadn't really been popularised yet for controllers, which is a bit of a shame because you have some 3D games where you need camera control. The camera control tends to fall to the shoulder buttons. It's a pretty nice feeling controller. It's nicely in the hand. It's quite large. Doesn't really feel as nice as the DualShock did, but you know, the DualShock is quite a special controller, I think. Now, what's very interesting about the Dreamcast controller is this thing here. This is called the VMU, the Visual Memory Unit. Now, not only is this a memory card, so you store all your game stuff on here, it can also be used outside of the controller as a sort of mini, I don't want to say console because it's not quite that powerful, but you can play little mini games related to the games you own. As you can see, there's a D-pad on here, A and B button, sleep and mode. Now, I can't really show that off because I don't have the batteries for this. It takes CR2032s, I believe, so easy enough to get hold of the batteries, but yeah, it was really, really cool. Like I say, it was compatible with a number of games. Probably one of the most famous ones is the Chow Garden stuff from Sonic Adventure, but there were many others. And while you were playing a game itself, this little screen here would display things on it. So it could be like a logo, it could be things like your player status or health. So in a way, it kind of was a precursor to the sort of things we see on modern consoles, like the PS4 and the PS5 has the little light near the touchpad to indicate certain things like what player you are, or in Grand Theft Auto, where you wanted. Or maybe even like, you know, a rudimentary sort of companion app that we might have. It's very, very simple, but I think it's a strong part of the identity of the Dreamcast. And finally, we of course have to talk about the online play aspect of the Dreamcast. Now, unfortunately, I've never really had the chance to experience the online aspect of the Dreamcast. There are apparently methods to get a system online still, and a handful of games are still playable. I've not tried it. I don't think it's something I ever will do so. But just to kind of touch briefly on what the Dreamcast offered for its online service, you have to go back and remember this was 1999 to 2001. It was pre-Xbox Live. It was, for many people, pre-broadband. Most people still had dial-up. And the concept of online play, I think, was still something that was the domain of the PC. Console owners didn't generally think about or care about the concept of online play. And yet, here was a feature that Sega were really pushing. Allowing you to play with others that were miles away, allowing you to download additional content for your games. Maybe, in some situations, allowing for basic voice chat. It was not perfect, but it was there on the console. You know, like I keep saying, this was immensely ahead of its time. Perhaps too ahead of its time, but, you know, you've got to try it. Amongst the games you could play for this online, you had Chu Chu Rocket, Fantasy Star, various sports titles, and Quake 3 Arena. So, with all of that said, I've rambled on enough about the console. Let's take a look at some of the games.
We of course have to start with Sonic Adventure. It was a launch title for the Dreamcast in the West, and it's now seen as a classic and one of the system's major selling points. This was of course the game that fully brought Sonic into the 3D world, after it having been toyed with in Sonic 3D Blast back on the Mega Drive. The premise here is usual. Sonic will team up with his friends to take down Dr. Robotnik, who wants to unleash chaos into the world and destroy Station Square to build his own city. It features 6 playable characters, which, being honest, some of them do handle significantly better than others. You're probably going to get the best mileage from Sonic himself, but then you've got like Big the Cat levels, which aren't really seen as being too great. I never really got on with the Knuckles levels either, where you had to sort of fly around and find the different shards of the Emerald, but it's interesting to see them try these different concepts and have the playable characters differ from each other. What Sonic Adventure also did was introduce the concept of a hub world, which would allow Sonic to run around this open world space. You could interact with a few NPCs before you went on to the actual stages themselves. This was also famously repeated in Sonic 06, where it didn't quite go down as well as it did in Sonic Adventure. So at the time, Sonic Adventure was a critical and commercial success. It sold around 2.5 million copies. It was also one that made use of the Dreamcast's online functionality. It would allow players to download additional minigame related content. You could download some level content in there, and also something involving the Chows, which was another minigame that was quite famously put in with Sonic Adventure. Unfortunately, I'd say time hasn't been completely kind to Sonic Adventure. Subsequent ports of the game to other platforms have been poorly received due to a larger number of bugs and glitches within them, and it has certainly become an example of a game that many would say has not aged well. When you play it now, it does feel slightly awkward to control, and like mentioned before, playing as some of the other characters is a little bit of a painful experience. Yet, at the time, it was a remarkable achievement, and for better or for worse, it's shown that you could make a Sonic game in 3D. Which brings us immediately onto Sonic Adventure 2. Sonic Adventure 2 was released just in time for Sonic's 10th anniversary in 2001, and it again would go on to become a bestseller for the platform and receive critical acclaim. So Sonic Adventure 2 took what the first one had done and set out to improve upon it, which I would actually say it did fairly well. There's still a little bit of awkwardness with the controls, but you can forgive that because it is the Dreamcast platform, and I think there's still a lot of experimentation with 3D movement and controls around that time, especially for platformers. This does feel that little bit tighter though. Sonic Adventure 2 is also notable for introducing the fan favourite character of Shadow, as well as featuring the very famous City Escape level and music. Perhaps more notable about Sonic Adventure 2 is that you have these two stories running alongside each other. You've got the hero side and the dark side. For the heroes, you'll play as Sonic, Tails and Knuckles. On the dark side, you'll play as Shadow, Dr. Eggman and Rouge the Bat. Each character fits a certain play type, so much like in Sonic Adventure 1, each character had a different style of play. This is the same here. Sonic and Shadow, their levels are more what we'd expect from a Sonic game. There's the emphasis on speed and platforming. For Tails and Dr. Eggman, the levels are more shooting focused, where you'll be sat in some sort of mech taking out enemies. And for Rouge and Knuckles, we see the return to that exploration style gameplay where you're tracking down the free shards of the Emerald. Again, much like Sonic Adventure, I don't think time has been as kind to this game as maybe some contemporary platformers. However, I would say that if you do look past the ports and memes and perhaps the knowledge of how lucky Sonic's 3D entries would be from then onwards, there's a lot of fun to be had here, and if you were going to get a Dreamcast, I would very easily recommend both Sonic Adventure titles as must-have games for the platform. Another launch title now, and this is a sequel to the very highly regarded Soul Edge, which appeared on the PlayStation a couple of years prior. Soul Calibur is one of them games that was first released in the arcades, and then was ported to the Dreamcast as a launch title. It was, at the time, a very stunning example of how developers could port a game from the arcades to the Dreamcast and have it be on par with the arcade experience, if not, in this case, slightly better in some people's eyes. Soul Calibur had a lot of love put into it. It was titled Soul Calibur to give the feeling of a fresh start for the series, rather than being called Soul Edge 2. And the development team actually first worked to evaluate what made the first title successful for quite some time before they rushed into making Soul Calibur. They were also inspired by an internal Namco prototype which could show a character running in the field and making with an 8-way movement system. They trialled this and found that it worked really well for the game, so decided to implement it for the title. Namco, the developers of Soul Calibur also worked quite closely with the team on Tekken and set out to create what they felt would be the best weapon-based fighting game of all time. And I would say that, especially for when this game released, they achieved that. It released to critical acclaim pretty much everywhere, and it is still regarded to this day as one of the best titles on the Dreamcast and perhaps one of the greatest fighting games of all time. If you have a look at the Metacritic score for this, it actually holds a 98, which I would say makes it one of the best launch titles for any platform. And when you play it, it's very easy to see why. For someone like me who isn't well versed in fighting games and is a little bit frightened by them, I found it so easy to pick up and play. The gameplay is very slick and smooth, the graphics, both for players and environments, look great, especially for a game released in 1999, and I think it's one of those just complete package games, which I think you could pick up and play now and you'd still have so much fun with it. I would say this is absolutely one of those must-have games for a Dreamcast owner. From one arcade port to another, and this is perhaps one of those examples of quite a weird and unique title that you associate with the Dreamcast. Crazy Taxi on paper sounds like a game that probably shouldn't work, and yet it works so well. The premise here, incredibly simple. You're a taxi driver, and you have to ferry your passengers to their locations as quickly as you can. You can play this in a traditional arcade style mode where you begin with a set time limit. For each passenger you pick up and drop off, you're awarded more time, and along the way you get little cash bonuses, not only for how quickly you get to the destination, but also performing little stunts along the way. You can also play it in a mode where you select your own time limit of 3, 5, or 10 minutes, and you're just trying to ferry as many passengers back and forth as you time and rack up a high score. Aside from its gameplay, Crazy Taxi is perhaps best known for its soundtrack. It's one of those games that I think really fit in the time it came out, that 1999 to 2001 period. You've got some songs here by The Offspring and Bad Religion, um, and yeah, it just feels very of the time. It's also perhaps known for the massive amount of product placement in there, quite famously having Pizza Hut and KFC. It struck an interesting balance with this because we might look at product placement nowadays and groan a little bit at it, especially when it's quite in your face. But for a game like Crazy Taxi, it worked because it added to the realism of the game world. It wasn't quite in your face. It wasn't someone didn't want to be ferried to KFC and then afterwards you get, a picture of the Colonel telling you how good his finger licking chicken is. It struck a really nice kind of balance there. Um, in recent years, it's perhaps became one of the franchises that's looked back on fondly, but it's disappeared a little bit. It has been acknowledged in a few Sega titles here and there, and there's been mobile ports and other games based off of it, but there doesn't seem to be any new traditional Crazy Taxi games on the horizon. Perhaps an interesting little fact about this, which I learned doing the research for this video, is didn't really see too many games come out that were influenced by it. And that was because Sega actually had a patent on the style of gameplay, and there was apparently a lawsuit during the Simpsons Road Rage game, which basically was Crazy Taxi but with the Simpsons, where they actually settled out of court. I believe the patent might have actually expired on this now, but it's quite an interesting example of how a company can patent a concept and will hold other publishers and developers accountable, I suppose. Moving on to another really interesting entry in the Dreamcast library, Jetset Radio. It's notable for being one of the first titles to make use of cel shading, which is a choice that allows it to look absolutely gorgeous back then, but now it still looks really striking and really nice. The premise here is that you're an inline skater, it's set in a futuristic, somewhat authoritarian world, and you are challenged with sort of fighting against your rival gangs and the sort of authoritarian establishment in this world. You do this by kind of tagging up objects and parts of the environment with your gang's tag, and throughout the game this can be either a simple button press as you pass an object, or for larger objects it's a more in-depth tagging minigame. Of course, there are other little things to take note of here. Your supply of spray paint isn't infinite. You'll be required to pick up spray can collectibles to recharge how much you have. Also, your health there as well. And as you tag items more and more, you'll find yourself pursued by the law. One of the cool things with this game as well is that it allowed players to create their own tags using the in-game editor. And back in the day, you were actually able to share these online. It kind of foreshadowed games in the modern era that would allow you to create your own characters, logos, imagery, and share them, so quite ahead of its time. It's one of those titles that just really oozes charm and personality. Everything in the game has kind of been lovingly created to present the player with a particular vibe, from the choice of graphics, the soundtrack, and the themes of the story. It's a title that really does stand out. I know around that time you did start to see a few extreme sports games being developed. It's kind of the start of the Tony Hawk series, and there were various other sort of attempts at it, and this is one that did stand out. I think with the success of last year's Tony Hawk's 1 and 2 remakes, that maybe Jetset Radio was one that was crying out for a new entry. There was a sequel to this back in 2002 for the Xbox, but aside from like a HD port and references in a few of the titles, it's one that has laid dormant for quite some time. Now we have an entry from Capcom. Powerstone is another arcade port, and it's sort of a 3D action brawler type game. I suppose the obvious comparison would be something like Smash Brothers, but Smash Brothers appears more on a 2D plane. The premise here is quite a simple one though. 19th century, there's a legendary treasure known as the Powerstone. Various characters from around the world are seeking it out for their own ends. Very colourful game, very charming cast of characters, one of those with really easy to learn gameplay. You're moving around this 3D stage, collecting your power-ups, and the aim is just to deplete your opponent's health bar. Over the course of the match, you'll also see gems appear. If you collect 3, you get a more powerful form, which enables you to use more special moves and has increased damage for a certain amount of time. As with a couple of other titles on this list, both this and the Powerstone sequel are beloved Dreamcast titles that are kind of laying dormant right now. It's quite unfortunate that this one seems to have slipped into the ether somewhat. Aside from a PSP port of the two titles back in 2006, the series hasn't really had anything since, which I do feel is sort of a shame. It does feel that in this modern day and age, with a bit of a resurgence of party games, it feels like maybe there is a place there for Powerstone. It's got a really fun cast, really easy to pick up and play, super charming. It can get quite chaotic, and it feels like the sort of thing that you can just really have fun with your friends with, both online and offline. And certainly in this day of, watching various people and groups streaming, it feels like it would fit into that world so well. And now another game that I think could have a place in today's world, Chu Chu Rocket. This is an action puzzle game for up to 4 players. The premise really is to lay down arrows in the game world to direct mice into your rocket, and you can also direct cats into your opponent's rockets to deplete their number of mice. Chu Chu Rocket was developed in part to test the online functionality of the Dreamcast, and it does lay claim to being one of, if not the first console game to properly support online play. This is an incredibly chaotic game in multiplayer, it's remarkably fun, and it's also one of those games that I think is classed as a bit of a friendship ender. It's really funny to play it with friends, and you'll find yourself shouting at each other as they're directing cats into your rocket and just having an absolute blast. There's a variety of maps to play through here, in addition to not only the general chaoticness of the game itself. As the match progresses, you can get this roulette wheel of different status effects. It could be more cats entering the arena, you could have the Mice Mania, which has hundreds more mice suddenly appearing, the players could change places, or it could slow down time. Much like the majority of games on this list, I feel it's very, very easy to learn, but you do want to come back for more. Or maybe at times just end up pulling your hair out in frustration as the opponents send more cats your way. In addition to the multiplayer mode, there's also a kind of single-player puzzle mode where you're charged with getting the mice into the rockets in a certain way, kind of avoiding the mice or other obstacles, which is quite fun and a bit more of a relaxing way to play the game. Over the years, this game's seen a port to the Game Boy Advance. I believe it was a Game Boy Advance launch title. There's also been an iOS and Android port, which has now been removed from sale. Like I say, much like Powerstone, it feels like there is a place for this game in today's world. It's this unique, chaotic, colourful game, and I am genuinely surprised we haven't seen any sort of HD port for it for modern platforms. Finally, we come to Shenmue, and I'd say, aside from Sonic Adventure, I would think Shenmue is probably one of the first games people would think about when anyone mentions the Dreamcast. It's an action RPG set in a living and breathing open world environment. And there wasn't really anything like Shenmue at the time. Now, I mentioned at the start of the video I wasn't really there for the Dreamcast launch, so I learned about this game a couple of years later. And even when I heard about it then, about 2003, 2004, the concept of it blew my mind. It was a remarkable achievement. It allowed players to really live in this world. You had these day-night cycles. You could walk around these towns, interact with NPCs, go into the arcades and play games that were actual games from Sega's history. You had job-based minigames, perhaps most famously the forklift minigame, and the game actually kind of required you to observe the time of day and schedules of the characters to progress through the story. It's a game whose legacy does still live on in the likes of the Yakuza franchise, and also arguably in a lot of open-world titles to this day. Now, it follows the story of Ryo Hazuki, a young man who's just witnessed the death of his father at their quiet home in Yokosuka. He sets out to investigate this man who killed his father and get his revenge. At the time, it was conceived as a multi-game epic, thought to span about 5 titles in total. For the Dreamcast, we got to see 2 of those titles. The second one was ported to the original Xbox. A third Shenmue game finally came out in 2019 after quite a lengthy development period following a successful crowdfunding campaign. Shenmue was thought at the time to be one of the most expensive video games to make, supposed to have cost in the region of $70 million. However, this has been later disputed to be more around $49 million. Unfortunately, due to this, despite its critical acclaim and a sizable cult following, the first 2 Shenmue games actually kind of failed to turn a profit. In some way, you could say they were responsible for some of the money issues Sega were facing at the time of the Dreamcast. It would be unfair, I think, to blame Shenmue entirely, because given the fact that Sega's problems likely started well back at the back end of the Mega Drive and the start of the Saturn, with the failure of the Saturn and the failure of things like the Mega CD and the 32X add-ons for the Mega Drive. Regardless of anything like that, regardless of the budget, regardless of like whether it's deemed a commercial failure, it is a legendary Dreamcast game, and I think it deserves to be played. As with many games on the list, maybe it hasn't aged too gracefully, and some of its systems may have been superseded now by the likes of Yakuza. But it is really interesting to go back and see these big milestones in gaming. Shenmue, perhaps like the Dreamcast itself, is very ahead of its time. Nowadays, fortunately, you don't need the original hardware to play it. You don't need to pick up Shenmue on the Xbox. It can be played on modern platforms, as a HD port was released prior to the third one's release. It's certainly worth checking out.
Tell me about it.
So there we have it, a brief look at the Sega Dreamcast, the final console from the company. It's a unique entry and a very influential one in the console marketplace, I think. As mentioned, I think it's perhaps it was too ahead of its time, but I think there always has to be a first for anything. So hopefully you enjoyed that video. Please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experiences with the Dreamcast, your favourite games and moments with it. And as always, please do leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more of my stuff. Until the next video, goodbye.